when I imagine somebody lifting Madeleine out of a bed, and I imagine Madeleine at some point waking up, and it's so horrific that your brain struggles to accept it as real.
Her small pink stuffed cat, soft, innocent and cherished by a child, became the silent witness to one of the most baffling disappearances in modern history. While toys typically represent childhood joy, this particular stuffed animal, known as Cuddle Cat, would become entangled in a web of suspicion, forensic investigation, and relentless media scrutiny. How could a child's plush toy become central to international accusations of deception and possibly even murder? On the evening of May 3, 2007, in the tranquil Portuguese resort town of Praia da Luz, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann vanished from her family's vacation apartment while her parents dined with friends at a nearby tapas restaurant. The circumstances were immediately troubling. No signs of forced entry, parents dining just 180 feet away, and 3 young children left sleeping alone in an unlocked apartment. But what happened in the hours, days, and weeks following would transform this missing child case into something unprecedented. A global media phenomenon, a diplomatic incident, and a mystery that continues to divide public opinion nearly 2 decades later. At the center of this storm stood Kate McCann, Madeleine's mother, clutching her daughter's favorite toy, Cuddle Cat. The pink stuffed animal had been left on Madeleine's bed the night she disappeared. In the aftermath, Kate carried it everywhere, often photographed pressing it to her face, seemingly drawing comfort from the last tangible connection to her missing daughter. Yet this same toy would later become the subject of intense scrutiny when cadaver dogs allegedly alerted to it during the investigation. And when Kate made the decision to wash Cuddle Cat in July 2007, more than 2 months after Madeleine's disappearance, it sparked accusations that she was deliberately destroying evidence. Was this simply the action of a grieving mother wanting to clean her missing child's beloved toy? Or was it, as some investigators and armchair detectives have suggested, a calculated attempt to remove incriminating evidence? The story of Cuddle Cat represents everything controversial about the McCann case, where even the most innocent objects became loaded with suspicion, where grief behaviors were scrutinized for signs of guilt, and where the line between victim and suspect blurred in unprecedented ways. Tonight we'll examine the evidence surrounding this infamous stuffed animal. We'll separate fact from fiction, trace the timeline of events, and analyze what the handling of this single piece of potential evidence reveals about the broader investigation. What we uncover may challenge everything you thought you knew about this case. If you're fascinated by cases where the smallest details matter, hit subscribe now and join our community of true crime investigators. This is the kind of deep analysis you'll only find here on Criminal Instinct. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann represents the perfect storm of investigative failures, media sensationalism, and public obsession. What began as a vacation in the Algarve region of Portugal for the McCann family, Kate, Jerry, and their 3 children, would evolve into one of the most expensive missing person investigations in history, spanning multiple countries and generating thousands of reported sightings. The basic facts remain undisputed. The McCanns were dining with 7 friends, collectively known as the Tapas 7, at the resort's restaurant. Throughout the evening, the adults took turns checking on their sleeping children. At approximately 10 p.m., when Kate McCann went to check, she discovered Madeleine was missing from her bed, while her twin siblings continued sleeping nearby. What followed was chaos, a frantic search of the resort. Portuguese police, who initially treated the case as a simple missing person situation rather than an abduction, and crucial early mistakes that would haunt the investigation for years to come. Where are you watching from? Have you followed the McCann case from the beginning? Let me know in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to hear which cases resonate with viewers from different parts of the country. In the days following Madeleine's disappearance, Cuddle Cat transformed from a child's plaything into something far more significant, a powerful symbol that would come to represent different things to different people. For Kate McCann, It became her last tangible connection to her missing daughter, a comfort object in the midst of unimaginable trauma. Kate's attachment to the toy was immediate and visceral. In her 2011 memoir, Madeleine, she wrote, "I couldn't let go of Madeleine's Cuddle Cat. It was all I had left of her." Photographs from those early days show Kate clutching the pink cat constantly, during press conferences, while walking through Praia da Luz, and during meetings with Portuguese authorities. According to friends, she would often sleep with the toy and carry it everywhere she went. This behavior, while understandable to many as a manifestation of maternal grief, became the subject of intense psychological analysis in the media. Body language experts were brought in to analyze Kate's demeanor while holding the toy. Was she clutching it too tightly? Not emotionally enough? The scrutiny was relentless and often contradictory. Dr. Joe Sullivan, a forensic psychologist who advised the investigation, would later explain, "Parents of missing children often fixate on objects belonging to their child. It's a completely normal grief response, a way of maintaining connection when the child themselves is absent. Yet this normal grief response would soon be weaponized against Kate in the court of public opinion. The media's portrayal of Cuddle Cat evolved dramatically over time. Initially, it was presented sympathetically, the heartbreaking image of a mother clinging to her daughter's favorite toy. British tabloids ran close-up photos of Kate, with the pink cat pressed against her face, creating powerful visual shorthand for maternal anguish. But as suspicion began to fall on the McCanns, the narrative shifted. The same images were recontextualized, sometimes with sinister captions questioning Kate's emotional authenticity. The Daily Mail ran a story titled, "Why Does Kate Always Carry Cuddle Cat?" suggesting there was something performative about her attachment to the toy. Behavioral analysts appeared on television programs speculating about whether Kate's relationship with the stuffed animal was natural or staged for cameras. What many failed to recognize was that Kate's behavior existed in an impossible space. Anything she did would be interpreted through whatever lens the observer brought to the case. Those who believed in her innocence saw genuine maternal grief. Those who suspected her involvement saw calculated performance. Beyond its emotional significance, Cuddle Cat took on an entirely different dimension when it became potential evidence in the investigation. This shift occurred in late July 2007, when British cadaver dogs were brought to Portugal to assist with the case. The handler, Martin Grime, brought two specialized dogs, Eddie, trained to alert to the scent of human cadavers, and Keeler, trained to detect human blood. According to reports, Eddie allegedly alerted to Cuddle Cat during searches of the McCann's vacation apartment and their subsequent rental villa. This development transformed the stuffed toy from a symbol of grief into a potential piece of forensic evidence. If the cadaver dog's alert was accurate, it suggested the toy had been in proximity to a dead body, a devastating implication in a missing child case. But here's where our story takes an unexpected turn, one that's rarely discussed in most coverage of the case. Despite widespread reporting that Eddie alerted specifically to Cuddle Cat, a careful review of Martin Grime's official report to Portuguese authorities reveals something different. The report states that Eddie alerted to an area of the McCann's rental villa where several of Madeleine's clothes and toys were located, not specifically to Cuddle Cat itself. This crucial distinction has been lost in most retellings of the case, where the narrative that the cadaver dog alerted directly to Cuddle Cat has become accepted as fact. Furthermore, Keeler, the blood detection dog, did not alert to the toy at all, a significant non-event that raises questions about what, if anything, Eddie was actually detecting. If Cuddle Cat had been in contact with a dead body that left biological material, why didn't the blood dog alert to it as well? This discrepancy between what the official reports actually state and what has become public knowledge represents one of the most troubling aspects of the McCann case. How easily unverified claims can become cemented as facts in public consciousness. The timeline here is critical. The dog searches occurred between July 31st and August 8th, 2007. By this point, Kate had already washed Cuddle Cat, an action that would soon become one of the most controversial decisions in the entire case. But the washing itself occurred after the McCanns had already been interviewed multiple times by police, after forensic teams had already processed the apartment, and after Portuguese authorities had already returned the apartment to resort management. If Cuddle Cat truly held crucial evidence, why wasn't it seized immediately after Madeleine's disappearance? Why was Kate allowed to keep it for over 2 months before the dogs were even brought in? These questions highlight fundamental issues with how potential evidence was handled in the critical early stages of the investigation. The timeline surrounding Cuddle Cat becomes crucial when examining one of the most controversial actions in the case: Kate McCann's decision to wash the toy in mid-July 2007, approximately 10 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. To understand the significance of this event, we need to establish precisely when Cuddle Cat was last in Madeleine's possession. According to the McCann's statements to Portuguese police, Cuddle Cat was in Madeleine's bed on the evening of May 3, 2007. When Kate discovered her daughter missing at approximately 10 p.m., the toy remained on the bed. This detail appears in Kate's initial police statement and has remained consistent throughout her accounts of that night. In the immediate aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese police conducted a cursory examination of apartment 5A, but did not secure or seize many items as evidence. This critical oversight meant that potential evidence, including Cuddle Cat, remained in the McCann's possession rather than being bagged and tagged for forensic analysis. Photographs from May 4th through July show Kate frequently carrying the pink stuffed toy. It appears in press conferences during the McCann's audience with Pope Benedict XVI on May 30th, and during various public appearances throughout those early months. The toy had effectively become both a comfort object and a symbol of the search for Madeleine. Then, in mid-July 2007, Kate made a decision that would later be scrutinized intensely. She washed Cuddle Cat. The exact date isn't precisely documented, but based on Kate's diary entries and later statements, it appears to have occurred around July 12th, approximately 70 days after Madeleine vanished. In her 2011 memoir, Kate explained her reasoning. Cuddle Cat was getting increasingly dirty, and despite my sentimental attachment to it, I felt it was time to give it a wash. She further described noticing an unpleasant smell developing on the toy after months of constant handling. Kate wrote that she was initially reluctant to wash it, fearing she might somehow be washing away Madeleine's scent, but ultimately decided it was necessary. This explanation seems straightforward: a mother cleaning a well-handled stuffed toy after more than 2 months. However, the timing raised immediate red flags for Portuguese investigators. Just 2 weeks after Kate washed the toy, British cadaver dogs would be brought in to examine the McCann's apartment, rental car, and belongings. The Portuguese police, who by this point were increasingly suspicious of the McCanns, interpreted the washing as potentially deliberate evidence tampering. This suspicion was fueled by the fact that British consular officials had reportedly informed the McCanns in early July that additional forensic resources, including dogs, would soon be deployed in the investigation. Did Kate know the dogs were coming when she washed Cuddle Cat? The timeline here becomes murky. While there's no definitive evidence that Kate was specifically informed about cadaver dogs being brought in, the McCanns were generally aware that the investigation was intensifying. Gonçalo Amaral, the original lead detective on the case, would later claim in his book The Truth of the Lie that he believed the washing was a deliberate attempt to eliminate evidence before the dogs arrived. The public reaction to news of the washing was swift and polarized. Online forums exploded with accusations, with many seeing it as proof of the McCanns' guilt. "Why would an innocent mother wash away her missing daughter's scent?" became a common refrain. Others pointed out that washing a child's toy after more than 2 months of constant handling was perfectly reasonable behavior. What's often overlooked in this controversy is the fact that Portuguese authorities had ample opportunity to seize Cuddle Cat as evidence during the critical first days and weeks of the investigation. Standard protocol in most missing child cases would involve collecting the child's bedding, clothing, and personal items for forensic analysis. Yet Cuddle Cat remained with Kate for over 2 months before anyone expressed concern about its evidentiary value. This represents one of the fundamental contradictions in the case. If Cuddle Cat was important enough evidence that washing it constituted tampering, why wasn't it important enough to be properly collected and preserved by investigators in May? Forensic experts have since pointed out that if biological evidence such as blood or DNA had been present on the toy, it would likely have transferred to Kate herself during the weeks she carried it constantly, often pressing it against her face and sleeping with it. The notion that crucial evidence remained exclusively on the toy after such extensive handling stretches forensic credibility. Moreover, if the McCanns were indeed involved in their daughter's disappearance and death, as some theories suggest, would they have drawn attention to the toy by having Kate carry it so prominently for months? Would they not have disposed of it entirely rather than simply washing it? These questions highlight how the washing controversy, like many aspects of the McCann case, appears damning when viewed in isolation, but becomes more complex when placed in proper context. This case has so many layers. Make sure you like this video so more people can discover these hidden details. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these in-depth investigations to light. The washing incident also reveals something important about how grief behaviors are interpreted in high-profile cases. Actions that might seem perfectly normal in private become suspect when performed under the glare of international media attention. Kate found herself in an impossible position where any behavior, whether showing too much emotion or too little, whether preserving Madeleine's possessions exactly as they were or cleaning them, could be interpreted as evidence of guilt. This pattern of scrutinizing parental behavior would continue throughout the case, with everything from the McCann's sleep patterns to their decision to return to work, eventually being held up as somehow suspicious. The washing of Cuddle Cat became a perfect microcosm of this phenomenon, a normal action transformed into something sinister through the lens of suspicion. What time is it where you're watching? Our team is working around the clock to bring you these investigations, and I'm curious about when our viewers are tuning in from across the country. By late July 2007, the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance had reached a critical juncture. With conventional methods yielding few results, Portuguese authorities accepted an offer from British police to bring in specialized detection dogs. This decision would introduce two remarkable animals into the case, Eddie and Keela, whose alerts would dramatically shift the direction of the investigation and public perception. Eddie was an enhanced victim recovery dog, EVRD, trained to detect the scent of human cadavers. His handler, Martin Grime, claimed Eddie could detect the odor of human remains, even after a significant passage of time, and could discriminate between human and animal remains with remarkable accuracy. According to Grime's statements, Eddie had worked over 200 cases without a false positive. Keela, meanwhile, was a crime scene investigation (CSI) dog specifically trained to alert to human blood, even in microscopic quantities or after cleaning attempts. Together, these dogs represented cutting-edge forensic technology, living detection tools capable of identifying evidence that might be invisible to the human eye. Between July 31st and August 8, 2007, Eddie and Keela conducted a series of searches throughout Praia da Luz. They examined apartment 5A, where the McCanns had stayed, the villa the family had moved to after leaving the resort. Various vehicles, including the Renault Scenic the McCanns had rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance, and several other locations connected to the case. The searches were videotaped, creating a visual record that would later be scrutinized by millions online. In apartment 5A, Eddie allegedly alerted in several locations: behind the sofa in the living room, in the parents' bedroom, and in a corner of the children's bedroom. Keela, the blood dog, only alerted behind the sofa in the living room, not in the other locations where Eddie had indicated. In the McCann's rental villa, Eddie allegedly alerted to an area where several of Madeleine's clothes and toys were located. This is where the confusion about Cuddle Cat specifically begins. While many media reports and online discussions claim that Eddie alerted directly to Cuddle Cat itself, Martin Grime's official report is less specific, stating only that the dog alerted to an area containing Madeleine's belongings. The most dramatic alerts came during the examination of the McCann's rental car. Eddie allegedly indicated the presence of cadaver scent in the trunk and on the key fob, while Keela alerted to potential blood in the trunk. These alerts, combined with subsequent DNA testing that was initially described as significant before being deemed inconclusive, formed the backbone of suspicion against the McCanns. But here's where we encounter a crucial discrepancy that's rarely discussed: the inconsistency between Eddie's alerts and Keeler's confirmations. If Eddie was alerting to locations where a body had been present and left biological material, why didn't Keeler, the blood detection dog, alert in all the same locations? This pattern of Eddie alerting without Keeler's confirmation raises important questions about what exactly Eddie was detecting. Regarding Cuddle Cat specifically, the evidence becomes even more tenuous. If Eddie did alert to the area containing the toy rather than to the toy itself, this occurred after Kate had already washed it. Furthermore, Keeler did not alert to the toy at all. If Cuddle Cat had been in contact with a dead body that left biological material, why didn't the blood dog alert to it as well? This inconsistency points to a broader issue with how the canine evidence was interpreted and presented. The dog's alerts were treated by some as near-definitive proof of death, despite the fact that no corroborating physical evidence was ever found to confirm what, if anything, the dogs were detecting. To understand the limitations of canine evidence, we need to examine what experts in the field have to say about cadaver dogs and their reliability. Dr. Lorna Irish, a forensic anthropologist who has worked extensively with cadaver dogs, explains, "These dogs are incredible tools, but they're not infallible. Their alerts should be considered investigative leads, not evidence in themselves. Without corroborating physical evidence, a dog alert alone cannot tell us what happened, when it happened, or who was involved." This perspective is echoed in legal precedents across multiple jurisdictions. In the United States, for example, the 2004 case of Florida versus Ura established that cadaver dog alerts alone, without corroborating physical evidence, are generally insufficient to establish probable cause. Similarly, in the UK, dog evidence is typically considered an investigative tool rather than standalone evidence. Even Martin Grime himself, in his report to Portuguese authorities, included important caveats about the limitations of his dog's indications. He noted that the alerts could not establish time of death, cause of death, or whether a complete body or merely bodily fluids had been present. He also acknowledged the possibility of innocent transfer, where the scent of death could be carried from one location to another, without criminal implications. This last point is particularly relevant to the McCann case. As medical doctors, both Kate and Jerry McCann would have been regularly exposed to death in their professional lives. Kate, as a general practitioner, and Jerry, as a cardiologist, would have encountered deceased patients and potentially carried trace scents on their clothing or belongings. This innocent explanation for potential cadaver scent was largely overlooked in the rush to interpret the dog's alerts in the most incriminating light. Another crucial factor rarely discussed is the potential for handler influence on dog behavior. Studies have shown that detection dogs can be subtly influenced by their handlers' expectations or biases, a phenomenon known as the clever hands effect. Without suggesting any deliberate misconduct by Martin Grime, it's worth noting that by the time the dogs were deployed, Portuguese authorities were already focusing their suspicions on the McCanns. This investigative direction could have created an environment where subtle, unconscious cues might influence the search process. The scientific literature on cadaver dogs also highlights their sensitivity to environmental factors. False positives can occur due to certain cleaning chemicals, decomposing food, or even specific types of adhesives used in furniture, all potential factors in a vacation apartment and rental car. When we examine the totality of the canine evidence, the inconsistency between the two dogs' alerts, the lack of corroborating physical evidence, the potential for innocent transfer, and the scientific limitations of canine detection, a more nuanced picture emerges than what was presented in media reports and police statements. These investigations take hundreds of hours of research, digging through original documents, consulting with experts, and piecing together timelines. If you appreciate this deep dive into the evidence, consider supporting by sharing this video with someone who appreciates thoughtful analysis of complex cases. Following the alerts from Eddie and Keeler, forensic testing became the next critical phase of the investigation. If the dogs had indeed detected human remains or blood, Scientific analysis would be needed to confirm these findings and potentially identify whose biological material was present. This is where the case entered the complex world of DNA analysis and where the gap between forensic reality and public perception would grow to its widest. After the dog's alerts, Portuguese authorities collected samples from various locations in apartment 5A and the McCann's rental car. These samples were sent to the Forensic Science Service, FSS, in Birmingham, England, one of the world's leading forensic laboratories at the time. The decision to use a British lab rather than Portuguese facilities was made to ensure the most sophisticated analysis possible, given the high-profile nature of the case. The initial communication from John Lowe, a DNA expert at the FSS, seemed promising for investigators. In a preliminary email sent on September 3, 2007, Lowe indicated that a sample from the trunk of the rental car showed a partial match to Madeleine's DNA profile. This email was quickly leaked to Portuguese media, creating headlines suggesting definitive forensic evidence had been found linking Madeleine to the car, a vehicle the McCanns hadn't rented until 25 days after her disappearance. However, the final report from the FSS, delivered on September 7, 2007, told a very different story. After more thorough analysis, Lowe concluded, "The evidence we have now is not enough to support the hypothesis that the blood from the car came from Madeleine." He further explained that what had initially appeared to be a partial match was actually an incomplete DNA profile that could have come from any of several members of the McCann family. Regarding samples collected from areas where Eddie had alerted in the apartment, the FSS found no conclusive evidence of human remains. The DNA profiles recovered were complex mixtures consistent with multiple individuals having occupied the space, exactly what one would expect in a vacation apartment used by many different families. As for Cuddle Cat specifically, a startling fact emerges when reviewing the forensic reports. There is no indication that the toy was ever subjected to formal DNA testing at all. Despite its prominence in public discussions of the case, Cuddle Cat does not appear in the inventory of items tested by the FSS. If any testing was performed on the toy, the results were never included in the released case files. This absence represents one of the most significant forensic limitations in the entire investigation. If Cuddle Cat was considered important enough that washing it could constitute evidence tampering, why wasn't it properly collected, documented, and tested? This oversight highlights a fundamental disconnect between the narrative that developed around certain objects and the actual forensic attention they received. The contrast between scientific evidence and public perception in the McCann case is stark. While the forensic results were ultimately inconclusive, finding no definitive evidence linking the McCanns to any crime, the public narrative had already solidified around the idea that damning evidence had been discovered. Once the initial leaks suggesting a DNA match hit the headlines, subsequent clarifications and limitations received far less attention. This pattern, where preliminary or misinterpreted forensic information drives public perception more powerfully than final scientific conclusions, is unfortunately common in high-profile cases. The technical limitations of forensic science are rarely as compelling as sensational claims, and corrections seldom travel as far as initial accusations. The handling of physical evidence throughout the investigation reveals troubling inconsistencies in basic forensic protocols. Crime scene management, in the crucial first hours after Madeleine's disappearance, was notably lax by international standards. Apartment 5A was not properly secured, with dozens of people, including family friends, resort staff, and curious onlookers, moving freely through the space before it was properly processed. Portuguese detective Paulo Rebelo, who later took over the investigation, would acknowledge these early failures, noting in an internal report, "The crime scene was not preserved as it should have been. This contamination makes it difficult to establish with certainty what happened that night." Perhaps most surprising is how long it took for forensic teams to conduct a thorough examination of the apartment. While initial processing occurred, a comprehensive forensic analysis using luminol, which can detect blood even after cleaning, wasn't conducted until August 2007, 3 months after Madeleine's disappearance. By this point, the apartment had been cleaned and rented to new vacationers, severely compromising any evidence that might have remained. Here's a revelation that rarely makes it into discussions of the case. Portuguese authorities actually returned the keys to apartment 5A to the Ocean Club Resort on August 11, 2007, just 1 week after the dog searches. This decision effectively released the primary crime scene back to commercial use, while the investigation was still active and without having exhausted all forensic possibilities. This premature release of the crime scene would be unthinkable in most missing person investigations, particularly one with international attention. The handling of the McCann's rental car presents similar issues. While the vehicle was seized after the dog's alerts, it had been in the family's possession for over a month, during which time it had been used to transport everything from groceries to the twins' diapers to items moved from the apartment to the villa. This extensive use by the entire family explains why DNA from multiple family members was found in the vehicle, a perfectly innocent explanation that was overshadowed by more sinister interpretations. The forensic limitations in the McCann case weren't just technical, they were systemic. From delayed evidence collection to premature release of the crime scene, from leaked preliminary results to misinterpreted DNA findings, the investigation suffered from a cascade of procedural issues that compromised its integrity. Yet despite these limitations, the public narrative continued to be driven by the most incriminating interpretation of fragmentary evidence, creating a perception of guilt that scientific analysis simply did not support. The McCann case represents one of the most extraordinary examples of how media narratives can diverge from factual reality, creating a parallel version of events that takes on a life of its own. From the earliest days of the investigation, media coverage played a pivotal role in shaping public perception, often in ways that prioritized sensation over accuracy. The initial wave of reporting was largely sympathetic to the McCanns, portraying them as victims of an unimaginable tragedy. British tabloids, in particular, embraced the story of the photogenic doctor couple desperately searching for their missing daughter. Headlines emphasized the parents' anguish and criticized Portuguese authorities for perceived investigative failures. This narrative began to shift dramatically in August 2007, following the dog searches and leaked reports about forensic testing. Portuguese newspaper Correio da Manhã published a front-page story claiming that British police believed that Maddie died in the apartment, while British tabloid The Sun ran with "Corpse in McCann car." These headlines appeared before the final FSS report had even been completed, let alone properly interpreted. The impact of these premature claims was immediate and devastating. Public opinion, particularly in Portugal, swung sharply against the McCanns. Online forums filled with amateur sleuths dissecting every aspect of the case, often working with incomplete or inaccurate information. The narrative that the parents were somehow involved in their daughter's death and subsequent cover-up gained tremendous momentum, despite the lack of conclusive evidence. What's particularly striking about media coverage of the Cuddle Cat element is how certain claims became cemented as facts, despite contradicting the official case files. The claim that Eddie alerted specifically to Cuddle Cat appears in countless articles and documentaries, yet Martin Grimes' official report doesn't make this specific claim. Similarly, the timing of Kate washing the toy was often presented as suspiciously coinciding with the arrival of the dogs, when in fact it occurred approximately 2 weeks earlier. These distortions weren't merely sloppy reporting, they fundamentally altered how the public understood the case. By presenting speculation as fact and emphasizing the most sinister interpretation of ambiguous evidence, media outlets created a narrative framework where the McCann's guilt seemed obvious, even inevitable. The persistence of misconceptions about the case is remarkable even years later. A 2019 survey of British adults found that 43% believed the McCanns were definitely or probably involved in their daughter's disappearance, despite no charges ever being filed and multiple investigations failing to produce conclusive evidence against them. This enduring suspicion speaks to the power of early media narratives to shape public perception in ways that resist correction. Particularly persistent are misconceptions about forensic evidence. Many people still believe that Madeline's blood or DNA was definitively found in the rental car or apartment, despite the FSS's clear statement that the results were inconclusive. Similarly, the dog's alerts are often discussed as if they constitute definitive evidence rather than investigative leads requiring corroboration. These misconceptions extend to interpretations of Kate's actions and motives throughout the case: her decision to wash Cuddle Cat, her emotional demeanor in press conferences, her refusal to answer certain questions during police interviews. All have been subjected to armchair psychological analysis by people with no clinical expertise or personal knowledge of Kate. Different perspectives on Kate's behavior reveal more about the observers than about Kate herself. Those predisposed to see guilt interpret her actions as calculated and suspicious. Those inclined toward empathy see the same behaviors as normal responses to trauma and grief. This divergence highlights how confirmation bias shapes our interpretation of ambiguous information. Mental health professionals who specialize in trauma have offered alternative perspectives on Kate's behavior. Dr. Lucy Beresford, a psychotherapist who has studied parental responses to child disappearance, notes, "There is no correct way to grieve or respond to trauma. What appears unusual to outside observers may be perfectly normal coping mechanisms for the individual experiencing the trauma." Regarding the washing of Cuddle Cat specifically, forensic psychologist Dr. Keith Ashcroft has suggested, "Maintaining cleanliness can be a way of exerting control in an otherwise uncontrollable situation. For a parent whose child has disappeared, cleaning their belongings might represent hope for their return or an attempt to create normalcy amid chaos." These professional perspectives rarely made it into mainstream coverage, which preferred more sensational interpretations of behavior. The nuanced reality that human responses to trauma are complex and often counterintuitive was lost in the rush to judgment. Perhaps most troubling is how the media narrative influenced the investigation itself. Portuguese authorities, under intense pressure to solve the high-profile case, may have been influenced by the same sensationalized reporting that was shaping public opinion. This created a dangerous feedback loop, where media speculation influenced investigative direction, which generated more sensational headlines, further cementing public perception. The McCann case demonstrates the tremendous power media narratives hold in shaping not just public opinion, but potentially the course of justice itself. When sensation overtakes fact, when complex realities are reduced to simplistic narratives, the search for truth becomes nearly impossible. What's the weather like today where you are? Our team is weathering through mountains of documents to bring you the truth behind these complex cases, regardless of how challenging the investigative climate becomes. After examining the evidence surrounding Cuddle Cat and its role in the Madeleine McCann case, we're left with a stark contrast between what we actually know and what remains uncertain, a distinction that has often been blurred in public discourse. What we know with certainty is limited. Madeleine McCann disappeared from apartment 5A in Praia da Luz on May 3, 2007. Her favorite toy, Cuddle Cat, remained on her bed. Kate McCann carried this toy for months afterward and washed it in mid-July 2007. Cadaver dogs were deployed in late July and early August, with Eddie alerting to various locations, including an area containing Madeleine's belongings. Forensic testing of samples from these locations yielded inconclusive results, with no definitive evidence linking the McCanns to any crime. What remains uncertain is vast. We don't know what happened to Madeleine. We don't know if Eddie was alerting to actual cadaver scent or to some other stimulus. We don't know if Cuddle Cat itself was ever formally tested for DNA or other forensic evidence. We don't know whether Kate's decision to wash the toy was innocent or calculated. And perhaps most importantly, we don't know whether focusing so intensely on the parents diverted crucial resources away from finding the person who may have abducted Madeleine. This uncertainty hasn't prevented the case from having a profound and continuing impact. The McCann investigation has influenced how missing children cases are handled internationally, with many jurisdictions implementing more rapid response protocols and cross-border cooperation mechanisms. The case highlighted the challenges of conducting complex investigations across different legal systems and cultural contexts. For the McCanns themselves, the impact has been immeasurable. Beyond the unimaginable trauma of losing their daughter, they've endured years of public suspicion, media intrusion, and online harassment. Their experience represents a cautionary tale about the dangers of trial by media and the devastating personal consequences when speculation is treated as fact. The broader implications for missing persons investigations are significant. The McCann case demonstrates how easily investigations can be derailed when media narratives and public pressure influence investigative direction. It highlights the dangers of confirmation bias, where investigators become fixated on a particular theory and interpret ambiguous evidence to support it, rather than following where the evidence actually leads. The case also reveals the limitations of forensic science in the public imagination. While television portrays DNA and other forensic techniques as nearly infallible, the reality is far more nuanced. Partial profiles, contaminated samples, and inconclusive results are common in real-world investigations. Yet these limitations are rarely understood by the public. Perhaps most importantly, the McCann case reminds us of the human cost when sensationalism overtakes fact. Behind the headlines and theories are real people experiencing real trauma, not just the McCanns, but also the Portuguese community of Praia da Luz, the investigators who dedicated years to the case, and countless others whose lives were touched by Madeline's disappearance. As we conclude our examination of Cuddle Cat and its significance in this case, we're left with more questions than answers, a reflection of the case itself. What we can say with certainty is that the simplistic narratives that have dominated public discourse fail to capture the complexity of the evidence and the investigation. The truth about what happened to Madeleine McCann may never be known with absolute certainty, but by examining the evidence critically and distinguishing between fact and speculation, we can at least approach that truth with the rigor and respect it deserves. For more in-depth true crime investigations that go beyond the headlines, subscribe to Criminal Instinct and hit that notification bell. Our commitment is always to the evidence, wherever it leads, even when that means challenging popular narratives and asking the questions others won't.